Hi everyone. So I thought we would get started. We're just probably 30 seconds away from 1:15. But welcome to everyone who is joining us online. My name is Grace. I'll be chairing the session today. So we have a range of modes. We have Charli who'll be presenting first. She's joining us live on Zoom, and then we have a pre-recorded video from Max that I will play, and then we have Sarah and Grace who are here in person. So I will just share the screen and they will stand here in front of the camera and present to you. Can I just get a thumbs up to make sure you guys can hear me before we get started? Yeah, okay, good. Hi, Charli.
Hi.
Oh, yeah, heaps of thumbs up. Thanks, guys. All right. So, Charli, welcome. Charli is a Food Waste Innovation Summit intern. So I was one of her supervisors alongside Miranda, and her sponsor was Waste Ed by Kate. But I'm sure Charli will tell you all about her sponsor. And her project was a workshop analysis on behavior changes towards minimizing food waste. Over to you, Charli.
Cool. I'll just check that my screen share is working. Has that come up all right?
Yeah, and then if you just go present. Awesome. Can you make it bigger? Oh, that's fine.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's perfect. All right, off you go.
Hi everyone. As Grace just introduced me, my name's Charli and I'm a food sci and nutrition student. I wanted to be a part of the Food Waste Summer studentship because I have a big interest in all things food related. And I thought learning more about food waste and sustainability in the food world would be very interesting and would also be beneficial to my studies. The project I was assigned was working with the great team at WasteEd to investigate whether their food lovers masterclasses were actually resulting in attendees to reduce household food waste. So let's talk about the Food Lovers Masterclass. Kate runs workshops all over the country talking about all things food waste. This includes mind-blowing statistics about wasted food, tips and tricks about food storage, what to do with your leftovers, meal planning ideas, utilizing freezer space, and all things in between. It has been identified as the only provider of a nationwide food waste reduction program which is run in person. We wanted to do this study to investigate the effectiveness of these masterclasses and whether they are helping to make a dent in the huge issue of food waste in New Zealand. The Ministry for the Environment and Waste Mins New Zealand were on board with this, and there was potential for more funding for WasteEd to continue these workshops, furthering their mission to tackle food waste in New Zealand. These workshops, which are mostly financially supported by councils across the country, aimed to educate communities about effective strategies to reduce food waste, emphasising cost-saving measures. Each workshop lasts around 2 hours, providing a serious yet engaging masterclass. Attendees are exposed to lots of interactive chats, gaining insight into the critical issue of food waste and how they can combat this problem from their own homes. The cost of admission consistently remains below $20, offering accessible education to everyone. Sponsors enhance the experience by providing items for gift packs for all attendees. Some examples of these would be glass containers, metal straws, reusable cloth, and beeswax wraps. Attendance to these workshops usually ranges somewhere between 20 to 40 participants per location. So we wanted to figure out whether the education people were getting from these workshops was beneficial. So we decided to use a series of surveys across different points in time to capture insights into participants' food-related behaviours and opinions. Prior to the masterclass, all attendees were required to complete a pre-attendance survey. This survey encompassed quantitative questions regarding current practices of food wastage, as well as asking their level of agreement with statements regarding food wasting habits. We also asked demographic questions to establish an understanding of the participants' characteristics. The primary objective of the pre-attendance survey was to establish a baseline data set. This foundational information enabled us to monitor and analyze any changes in participants' habits and opinions after attending the class. We also gave participants an on-the-night survey, but this was more to gain participants' satisfaction from the workshop rather than for any sort of data analysis. But we were still able to gain valuable insight into what participants were enjoying about the classes from this. We used 2 post-attendance surveys, both at 3 and 6 week, and these surveys mirrored the structure of the pre-attendance survey, maintaining a focus on quantitative measure relating to food waste within their households. Participants were asked to reflect on whether their habits had changed and to provide input on statements related to food waste. This study design allowed us to track and assess the sustained impact of the masterclasses on behaviours and perspectives over time. Along with the goal of tracking participants' behaviour change over time, we also aimed to find out which was the best way to circulate surveys. To do this, we used 3 different methods to get responses for our survey data at 3 and 6 weeks post-workshop. The first method which we used was simply sending an email to participants, which included a link to our survey at both 3 and 6 weeks post-workshop. Secondly, Kate recorded personalised videos, including more tips and tricks about food waste, which were sent every week for the 6 weeks following the participants' masterclass. At weeks 3 and 6, a link to the surveys was included along with the videos. Finally, we used a text message method where every week for the 6 weeks following the masterclass, we sent participants a text message with a survey question. This method was only able to garner a condensed version of the survey as we only had the opportunity to ask 6 different questions, but the focus remained on the quantitative measures, which were asked twice at week 3 and 6. This whole process took around 4.5 months to complete, as the workshops were quite spaced out, and then following each workshop we needed 6 weeks to complete the survey process. This process started following the commencement of the first workshop, which were based in Christchurch, on the 18th of September, and we got the last set of data from Te Puke on January 16th. My involvement in this project, however, was only 10 weeks long, and during this time my main focus was analysing the collected data and drafting a report, which is currently still in the works and will be used to show the Ministry for the Environment and Waste Mins. I also managed all the scheduling of the emails which went out, organising the mailing list, entering the manual data into our survey software, and I collaborated with Brodie, and we evaluated the study design and critiqued implemented techniques. A noteworthy highlight as well was being able to spend a week at the office in Katikati, where I got to attend 2 of Kate's masterclasses, providing valuable insights into the project's objectives. So as shown on screen, the outcome regarding the most effective method of communication was evident. Text message survey questions got significantly higher response rates, reaching nearly half of participants up until the 6-week mark. In contrast, both of the email methods got less than 10% response at both 3 and 6 weeks. We considered that email surveys might be outdated and text messages could be a more effective alternative. Based on the response we got from our surveys, it was clear to see that attendees' household food waste had decreased following attendance to the Food Lovers Masterclass. Participants were reporting that their households were producing less waste. The scale which we used to measure this was asking participants to measure their weekly household food waste using a 2-litre ice cream container. The average weekly reported waste pre-attending the class was somewhere between 1 and 2 2-litre ice cream containers a week. And at 6 weeks, the average food waste reporting was less than 1/2 of an ice cream container to nothing at all. As you can see on screen now, these graphs compare these figures, and you can see that there is lots more people reporting none at all in the 6-week post-attending graph. Alongside these measures, we used a text box and various options to understand what changes participants committed to change within their households post-workshop. We got lots of positive responses, which indicates a genuine commitment to applying workshop learnings in their daily lives. Displayed on the screen are some of the positive entries showing a glimpse into some of the impactful outcomes which we have witnessed. We also gained participants' opinions on food waste statements after the workshops, but observed minimal change in reported feelings. We have attributed this to the proactive nature of the participants these workshops attract. Most people who likely attend these workshops have already recognised food waste as an issue and are seeking some advice on how to tackle the problem. Looking ahead, it would be beneficial to broaden our audience reach, recognising the potential to engage different demographics. This leads me to talk about some of the limitations which we experienced in this study. The first follows on well for what I was just saying about the demographic. We suspect that a lot of the time, the participants who actually responded to our follow-up surveys were the ones who were actually invested in making a change. This could have potentially skewed our data, which we collected. So if we were to repeat the study, this could be something which we could work on to ensure this doesn't happen again. The timeframe of this study also happened to fall right in the holiday period where no one is checking their emails. This means a lot of the email surveys could have gone completely unopened, and even the text messages from an unknown number may have been ignored. Another thing to note about the holiday season is it is actually the time of year where most food goes to waste, because people are often throwing dinner parties, big family barbecues, etc. And these type of events quite often have too much food. This also makes food waste hard to measure, as some people in the text survey pointed out to us. It is also important to point out that the manual labour which was required for the text method, although this was found to be the most effective way to communicate our survey questions with participants, this method was labour intensive and would not scale up well. To get the text data into SurveyMonkey, which is the software we used, we needed to look through each individual text reply which we had gotten and enter this data into SurveyMonkey through a manual data entry. This wasn't too much of an issue for this study because of our population size, which wasn't too big. But if we wanted to scale up this study, I think further investment into different software which would cut out this process would be beneficial. So to conclude, we made great breakthroughs in this study. Finding out which communication method is best will save time and money in the future when doing similar studies. Email surveys might be outdated and not worth investing in. The data which we got from participants regarding how these masterclasses impacted them and seeing that reported food waste is declining following attendance to these classes is very positive, an outcome which is beneficial for all people involved. But thank you for listening, and I look forward to answering any questions which anyone has about this. And I have learned a lot throughout this process, and I feel very lucky to have been a part of such an impactful research. So I'd like to say thank you to Food Waste Innovation Program and Waste Ed for making this possible. Thanks.
Yay, awesome, Charlie. That was so good.
Thanks.
So how we're running this session is we're just going to run through all the presenters first, and then we will have the Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for Charlie, just keep them in mind, and we'll have that session at the end. So Charlie, if you just want to stay online, that would be awesome.
Yep, cool.
So next up we have Max, and Max couldn't be with us today, so I am going to play a pre-recorded video that he has sent us. So just bear with. So Max is also a food waste innovation intern, and he did a internship with Auckland City Council, looking at their food scraps collection rollout that is going on at the moment up there. So without further ado, let's hope this works.
Kia ora, my name is Max Doyle, and for my food waste innovation research project, I work with Auckland City Council in their food scraps department. Here's an overview of my slides. First, I'll talk to you about how my internship was more on a traditional layout. Then I'll go through and talk about why we collect food scraps, how the service works in Auckland, how collections work, an overview of our circular economy, a brief look at the data dashboard. Then I'll go into describing about our Riparawa facility and our Waiheke facility, and finally key takeaways and final reflections. So my research project with the Auckland Council was more set out in a more traditional layout. It didn't require any research or new findings due to the rollout already being underway. The responsibility within the council was to work within and learn about the different food scraps teams and create a data dashboard from collected tonnage information in order to track participation rates in different areas. With that information, we'd then implement changes such as education programs if in a certain area was to lose participation and engagement from consumers. Why do we collect food scraps? In Auckland, 100,000 tonnes of food scraps are sent to landfill per year. Nearly 92% of the emissions from waste are derived from organics in landfill, and food scraps are a resource and not waste. So here's a breakdown of the rubbish bin composition in Auckland. You can see that food waste nearly makes up 50% of our rubbish bins here. The service is supposed to be introduced alongside private composting. So here at Auckland Council, we still encourage consumers to do composting, but use the food scrap service as an additional service on top of that on things that wouldn't be able to be composted. A survey of our food scraps trials in Papakura showed that 75% of home composters still use the curbside service to deal with food waste as part of a complementary approach. So how the service works in Auckland is that each household is delivered a curbside bin. The bin will contain the following items in order to help with using the service. So that's a 23-litre curbside bin, a kitchen caddy, 60 compostable liners which are made from potato starch, and an information pamphlet. Apartment buildings and retirement village residents may also receive the same as residential home owners, but more commonly will receive everything but the curbside bin, the 23-litre one. Instead, a large 120 or 240 communal bin for everyone in the complex to share. So this is how the service is laid out to work. So first of all, the resident collects the food scrap bins, can be meal leftovers, expired food, or veggie peels. Second, they'll empty the food scraps into the curbside bin. That can either be just the food scraps from the kitchen caddy without the bin liner, or the bin liner itself with the food scraps in it. And then finally, they'll put the bin out for collection. I was lucky enough to be able to experience walking the streets of South Auckland and Manukau, checking for food scrap bin contamination and participation in these regions. And we would apply something that we call a green tag to the bins that were being used correctly, or noting on the tag any changes that we required, such as bread bag, plastic, cling wrap, and aluminium foil was the most common. So this is how food scraps works in MUDs. We call them MUDs, it's multi-unit developments. So they're like apartment buildings and a retirement village that may require a different service. Alternative services have been trialled for some properties in North Shore and Papakura. Residents can share larger wheelie bins, like what I mentioned earlier, rather than having their own individual curbside bins. Part of the team that I worked for was the MUDs team, which included 3 steps. The first step was to find the contact details for the particular site, and have the site assessed in terms of how many bins, what size bins, and at what frequency they needed to be collected. Second was then sending the service proposal to the respective contractor for that area, and finally arranged a bin order with our bin contractor and delivering the bins to the particular site. So this is an example of a bin delivery that we did on North Shore at a retirement village. Some multi-unit developments require caddy packs to be made up, as you can see in the pictures, which require the liners and the pamphlets, 3 rolls of liners and a pamphlet each. in order for the residents to independently come and collect their own. So here's an overall view of how large the process is, and in terms of the line of production on how food scraps gets from a resident's plate to liquid fertilizer and renewable gases, which is what is the end product at our eco-gas anaerobic digestion facility. Below are all the different parties involved, each with their respective contractor. So we have 50 collection trucks and drivers, each from our 3 separate contractors, which is NEL, Green Gorilla, and Waste Management, which cover each area of Auckland. We have 2 consolidation facilities, one in Waitakere, one in Papakura. We have 1 processing plant in Reporoa, which is where the anaerobic digestion breaks down the food scraps into that renewable gases and fertilizer. We have 500,000 food scrap bins and caddies, and 1.5 million packs of liners that have been rolled out. And this is our circular economy, just a brief summary. So food is a valuable resource. However, when the food goes into the landfill, it produces methane and CO2, which are harmful greenhouse gases. 1 tonne of methane released into the atmosphere creates the same amount of global warming as 25 tonnes of CO2. When food is trapped in landfill, the nutrients it contains are also trapped, but those nutrients can be returned to the land in biofertilizer to grow more food. They will then be converted into renewable energy and biofertilizer through our anaerobic digestion facility in Reporoa, which is what I talk about soon. So here's kind of summary on the data dashboard. This isn't publicly available information, but this is what I worked on in terms of for my research project. So I took collection information and tonnage from each of our contractors that I mentioned earlier for every area in Auckland, and I compiled them together to track whether we were meeting the required participation rates, and if any regions had a sudden drop in tonnage, then we'd investigate the issue. So as you can see, this is kgs per household per area just for the last 10 weeks. That's the graph there. So you can see the straight line is what we predicted would be the rollout for each area. So that's 1.44 kgs per household. And the curvy blue line underneath is where we're actually sitting in terms of the rollout. So we're slightly below what we forecasted, but as you can see, there hasn't been any severe drop-offs, except you can see towards the end there, which was the Christmas area. So here is another area of the data dashboard. We have 7 different areas of this. I'm just showing 2, but this is the food scrap tons per area. So you can see the lines. Each line represents a different area in Auckland. We're split up into 7 different areas that stretches all the way from Rodney up, all the at the top of Auckland, and all the way down to Pūhau, which is in our South Auckland region. This is where we track how many tons we're getting from each area, and if any area has a severe drop-off or increase, then we investigate the issue. Sometimes it can be as easy as the truck driver putting it in the wrong area and tons from one area being recorded as a different area, which can make these results inaccurate. So this is our eco-gas facility in Reporoa. Food scraps are transported from the consolidation facilities in Papakura and Waitakere from each of the 7 areas in Auckland. Large hauler trucks that are already making the trip from Reporoa transport the food scraps with their empty return trip. These hauler trucks are much larger than the normal collection trucks, which means we can take a lot more food scraps for each trip. And this facility is New Zealand's first large-scale food waste to bioenergy facility using anaerobic digestion technology, which has been proven overseas, especially in the UK. So as you see the big shed with the eco-gas logo on it, that is where food scraps is transported to, emptied from the hauler trucks and blended up into a liquid. That liquid is then pumped into the big tanks you see in the back there with the domes, into where the anaerobic digestion bacteria eats away and breaks down that food scrap liquid into biofertilizer and the methane gases, which powers the greenhouses next over the road that grow tomatoes, and the biofertilizer is used instead of synthetic fertilizer, which is very bad for the environment on local farms. This is our Waiheke transfer station. I was lucky enough to visit this on one of the days, It's completely independent to Auckland's refuse and recycling infrastructure. They accept almost everything from general rubbish and recycling to green waste, wood, metal, rubber, kitchen appliances, clothes, and electronics. They are very big on trying to get people to reuse items, that even paint gets recirculated on the island. It means that they get to reduce the volume of waste leaving the island, and then they get to resell and recirculate the items to the less fortunate residents on the island due to having to pay for everything that comes off the island. So key takeaways and final reflections. Working with Auckland Council in this initiative has given me a broader and deeper understanding of how resourceful food scraps can be, and made me very aware of the various steps within such a simple sounding task. The internship has shown me how to overcome several challenges and barriers that I think moving forward would be very insightful for Dunedin City Council's own food scraps rollout later in July. From initially thinking food scraps were wasteful to now being aware that they are very useful has enlightened me and actually made me excited to be part of Dunedin's own food scraps rollout. So some of the challenges that I found with Auckland's rollout was the weight of curbside bins being too light, and after collection, these bins would be blown onto the road and be made a hazard for motorists on the road. I also noticed that people's education in terms of how the food scraps are transported and transformed into renewable gases was not established enough, which led to negative thinking and a negative attitude towards this new change. Finally, I found that the contamination within the bins, which included bread bags, cling wrap, and tinfoil, were very common due to the lack of advertising and education, which meant that it was very hard for our eco-gas workers at the facility to then produce a renewable source of food scraps due to having to take these contaminants out. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. That was so cool. It's such a staggering amount of food scraps that end up in the landfill. I can't believe that. I always think of this when you see like seagulls. Yeah, and they've like picked through a rubbish bag on the ground and there's just like food all over the road. So it's like, hopefully, with this new rollout, there's going to be one less thing that we'll be seeing. So next up we have Sarah. She has done her internship with the Sustainability Office, and she has looked at transforming the e-waste management system in Dunedin and Otago, and she is here with me in person, so I will move on over and I'll get your slides up. Yeah. I need to get out of that first. There we go. Cool. Sorry, everyone. So
is there a way to see the speaker notes? If not, I can pop up my laptop with it.
I'm not sure if you can do it whilst we're sharing screen.
I have it here.
Is that okay?
That's
all right. Cool.
Thank you. Kia ora. So I'm Sarah. My project is about transforming the e-waste management system in Dunedin and across Otago. So my aims of the project were to look at the implications of the product stewardship scheme, map public availability of batteries and e-waste in Dunedin, and investigate potential joint solutions for e-waste streams. So just a quick outline. I'll briefly explain e-waste and how it should be managed in a circular economy. I'll then share about existing e-waste systems at various population groups And from my findings, I have summarized recommendations that may inform the decisions of stakeholders in the e-waste economy, such as the DCC, the university, local recyclers and refurbishers. And these recommendations may even extend to e-waste managers in other economies or in other different cities. So e-waste and the circular economy. E-waste is any electronic product that has been deemed to no longer be operative and therefore discarded. This is when components have been damaged, such as in the case of like a broken laptop screen or a toaster that's too rusty to be used. It can also be deemed no longer operative once the electronic product has served its purpose, such as in the case of disposable vapes or computers that are unable to support updated software. So e-waste currently falls under a linear economy where natural resources has been extracted to create these products. Once it has been determined to be no longer operative, it is discarded and goes to landfills. In this economy, it's not a renewable process, and it's definitely unsustainable in the long run once our natural resources run out. So to sustain our consumption of these products, a shift from a linear to a circular economy is crucial. Non-operable products should be returned to manufacturers and recycled to create new products, ensuring sustainable resource use. So to transition from a linear to a circular economy, we aim to emphasize the waste hierarchy. At the top of the waste hierarchy, we hope to reduce the resources being used and focus on innovative product designs that avoid producing waste. A tier below this would be to keep products in use for as long as possible by reusing, repairing, and repurposing them. And when reuse is no longer possible, these products should be recycled to then be used in future products. So for example, we can rethink how vapes are designed and produce a disposable product that does not contain any electronic components. A laptop with a broken screen can be replaced so that the laptop can still be reused. Computers with outdated software can be repurposed as models for use in deconstruction workshops. A rusty toaster that can't be safely reused can be recycled for its metal components. So our focus was on how e-waste management, how we can refocus our e-waste management to activities higher in the waste hierarchy. So the current climate globally, the report by Global E-Waste Statistic Partnership has predicted that global e-waste will reach 74 metric tons by 2030 due to higher consumption rates, shorter life cycles of electronic products, and limited repair options. As of 2019, 78 out of 193 countries have adopted national e-waste policy, legislation, or regulations. Of these countries, the most mature e-waste management system can be found in the EU. So they have regulatory frameworks such as the Waste, Electrical, and Electronic Equipment Device Directive and the Battery Directive, which establishes guidelines for proper collection, recycling, and disposal of electrical and electronic waste and batteries. So the long history of e-waste management in the EU has given rise to comprehensive regulatory frameworks, well-established collection and processing systems, and a higher public awareness and education. The EU can also leverage its scale for better collaboration and information sharing. So compared to the EU, New Zealand's e-waste management is still in its early days. It is a relatively smaller population with a smaller internal market and is a more geographically isolated country with a shorter history of e-waste management. With that said, New Zealand has made notable efforts in its e-waste management system. The Waste Minimisation Act 2008 establishes a framework for waste management and minimization. It includes provisions related to product stewardship and mechanisms for monitoring and reporting on the effectiveness of waste minimization plans. A waste disposal levy enacted by the Ministry for the Environment also generates revenue to fund initiatives that reduce waste and encourage resource recovery. Territorial authorities allocate this funding appropriately in accordance to the Waste Minimisation Act and to their own waste management and minimization plans. As of November 2022, a national product stewardship scheme by Tech Collect NZ was presented to the ministry with anticipation of its earliest possible in-effect date in 2026. So from the Tech Collect reports, a summary of stakeholder definitions and responsibilities was produced, which outlines how these stakeholders can best support the scheme in New Zealand. Tech Collect recommended territorial authorities to establish a stakeholder advisory group within their district to advise the accredited scheme manager on how to best implement various aspects of the scheme in the district, and also provide insight into the current position of e-waste management. To support the scheme, territorial authorities should also work with the accredited scheme manager to establish the scheme's collection network, such as establishing a collection service or procure site license agreements with collection partners. While it may take some time for the scheme to fully be implemented in 2026, territorial authorities may support repair and reuse options in Dunedin, and this may come in the form of creating a repair and reuse directory or providing a space for repair events. So back to looking at the e-waste management in the Otago region, existing collaborative efforts would be WasteNet Southland, which is a shared solid waste service for Gore, Invercargill, Southland District Council, and it provides information to users regarding recycling options. An Otago Regional Waste Officer is currently being recruited to hopefully liaise waste solutions for the entire Otago region and pools the resources of the entire Otago region. In the Otago region, Dunedin is the most populated city with more developed infrastructure, including railways, an airport, and educational institutes. As such, Dunedin produces more e-waste, with the university being a significant contributor as it procures fleets of electronic products. At the same time, due to its denser population, it receives a higher proportion of the waste levy funding to support Dunedin's waste management and minimization. So currently, this levy is used to subsidize public costs for recycling e-waste, and is also allocated as community contestable funding to support activities that minimize waste. In terms of public availability for e-waste collection, for battery collection, Waste Mints has collected this information on their website, and the options are seen here. And in terms of public availability for e-waste collection, there are currently no established repair options, but there are established reusers, refurbishers, and recyclers, which are seen here. So as part of my research, these stakeholders were then interviewed to understand their e-waste management practices. Apart from local refurbishers and recyclers, experts in the e-waste field, such as other territorial authorities, waste representatives, and managers were also interviewed to gain insight on the e-waste economy. And from my interviews, I derived two main themes. The first is where responsibility is managing e-waste lies, and the second was the challenges in managing e-waste. So there is an understanding that tackling e-waste should always start with the producers. In this linear economy, producer responsibility stops once the product is in the hands of the consumer. However, if there are protocols in place to deliver the product to the consumer, it is not too far-fetched to have protocols that return the products to the manufacturer at the end of its use to be recycled. On top of that, pressure should be placed on producers to produce sustainable products. For example, producing phones where the components are not glued together such that the phone can be repairable. And this pressure can come from consumers or can come from legislation. So this is where the responsibility of the government may come in. The government has the power to implement legislation that ensure products brought into the country have a recovery pathway or meet a certain climate profile. Doing so prevents producers from pushing the fiscal and operational responsibility of managing end-of-life products to downstream stakeholders such as territorial authorities and consumers. However, that does not mean that the community has no place in the e-waste economy. The community should utilize its resources in the form of sharing knowledge and upskilling. In the world of technology, it is important for individuals and communities to adapt and engage in technology. So engaging in upskilling courses in technology equips them with the skills to repair, access to communication channels, and make informed decisions when purchasing technological products. So with these skills, these communities would be resilient in sourcing its own technological solutions. In terms of challenges, producer decisions have been a barrier in achieving a circular economy. There is a pattern of planned obsolescence where products are designed to not be repairable. This encourages consumers to replace their existing products with new ones, which drives sales with little regard for the environmental implications. So lobbying for the right to repair and having a product stewardship scheme would hold producers accountable for their environmental impact. This brings us to the next challenge, which is poor public awareness and education. There is enough flexibility in the free market for any product to come in regardless of its environmental impact. The amount of natural resources extracted to produce these products are not well known, and it's therefore difficult for the general public to appreciate the lifespan of these products. There has been a strong emphasis on convenience, fueled by unsustainable design, which has unfortunately displaced the importance of sustainability in the public consciousness. The definition of e-waste is also not well understood by the general public. There is a misconception that curbside collection is capable of disposing e-waste responsibly. And a lot of public education, there has been a lot of pushes for public awareness around recycling, but not enough that focuses on activities higher in the waste hierarchy, such as repairing and reusing. So improving public awareness and education in these avenues would facilitate a more informed consumer base, encouraging responsible choices and create an economy that values sustainability. And lastly, many stakeholders face a lack of resources in their e-waste diversion activities. For example, there can be a team with the skills required to refurbish a laptop, but with the large volumes of broken laptops, the team is limited by the space required to hold these laptops, the time it takes to go through them, the finances to pay the mechanic, and the finances to pay for the laptops to be shipped away from rural areas that lack the appropriate processing infrastructure. So ideally, a product stewardship scheme and a shift in the economy to one that values sustainability would be able to solve these financial constraints. In the meantime, collaborative efforts may pool available resources to overcome these challenges. So for recommendations, the product stewardship scheme will be the best nationwide legislation that would focus on higher activities in the waste hierarchy, strengthening support for the scheme by taking on Tech Collect's recommendations, emphasizing the importance of this scheme in territorial authorities' waste management and minimization plans would be ideal. There are several rising local waste minimization initiatives in Dunedin. So improving communications between local stakeholders and the DCC would better inform the DCC and the public of current waste diversion options in Dunedin. This may be in the form of one, creating a directory that would enable the public to access these initiatives, two, facilitating networking events for these stakeholders that would allow information sharing and identify opportunities for collaboration, and three, assist in procuring spaces for storage and processing of e-waste and for events such as deconstruction or repair workshops. At a regional level, the future waste manager should procure e-waste services and public education resources for the whole region. Monitoring the quantities and flows of e-waste is essential for evaluating waste management efforts and to set and assess targets. The development of infrastructure and legislation is more efficiently implemented when supported by data, so it will therefore be worthwhile to quantify e-waste diversion and public education in Dunedin. It may be worthwhile to also consider more accessible battery collection services to keep batteries out of bins, which may pose a fire risk. Along with e-waste collection, this may be a one-off events at high traffic periods, such as at the university at the end of semesters. And it is also encouraged for facilities such as supermarkets and hardware stores to engage with waste mins to create safe battery collection facilities. So I've summarized a few points of interest I would have loved to look into if I had the time, in hopes to direct future research. So speaking to experts in this field has taught me a lot about the economics of e-waste. This information has influenced how I view my own purchases and how the commodification of electronic products has overplayed its value as a necessity and downplayed its environmental harms. So looking into how this knowledge can be made publicly accessible would align with the waste hierarchy, reducing waste by reducing purchases in the first place. It's easier said than done to quantify waste. So further research into how other businesses or countries have successfully quantified it and whether these methods are feasible in Dunedin's economy would be useful. Exploring sustainable products that lack the same reputation as established brands could also help assess their suitability for use in commercial businesses, especially in scenarios where security is a top priority. There is currently no ideal solution for recycling vapes, so innovation in this area would be immensely impactful in reducing the waste produced by vapes. And lastly, mature e-waste processing facilities are mainly found in developed cities like Christchurch and Auckland. So instead of establishing new infrastructure in the South Island, utilizing freight rails in Dunedin could reduce the carbon footprint of transporting e-waste to these existing facilities. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank the DCC, all the stakeholders that I interviewed, everyone at the Sustainability Office, and my friends and family who has helped me with this research. Thank you.
Yay! That was so awesome. Very informative and comprehensive. So next up we have Grace, and she is going to be telling us about the Green Island rummage waste and her research project with that. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Grace. I'm a student at the university who's studying law and science, and I'm just about to enter my 5th year. And my project was on waste diversion at Rummage, which is the tip shop out in Green Island. So I was asked how a data collection system could be implemented at Rummage. It's a resource and recovery area in Green Island, and they're moving a ton of items, keeping them out of landfill, which is super important work, but it's not known how much exactly that is. This is quite important to find out for obvious reasons like policy backing and things, and also to align with the DCC's carbon zero plan by 2030, so that they can measure the emissions that are being reduced by keeping those items out of landfill. The waste sector produces a pretty large amount of greenhouse gas emissions. It seems like a small number, around 6%, but the portion of those emissions that are methane means that it's quite a big issue, because methane is so much more potent than carbon dioxide. Secondhand stores obviously play a huge role in keeping items out of landfill, and collecting data on how many items are kept out of landfill in New Zealand and in Rummage specifically can help us motivate change and give these secondhand stores more support. And it can also help us to identify target areas where we maybe need to look into schemes to reduce our waste. So to tackle my research question, I started off with a little bit of background research just online, and this gave me a good backdrop of the issue and why it was important. And I saw a lot of really cool sustainable initiatives, but nothing quite directly related to my question on how this could be implemented at Rummage. And I also struggled to find information for New Zealand secondhand stores. So I decided to do a series of interviews, and these were with local op shops in Dunedin. And I went in to try and find out the processes that they were using in store, and whether or not a data collection method was happening already in some of these stores, and if it was, how, and if it wasn't, why not. And so that was really insightful. And then from there, I conducted a survey of the Rummage employees just to make sure that any findings or suggested systems that I came up with were actually practical and could be applied at Rummage, just to so my findings weren't too generalized. So I used thematic content analysis to look through my interviews, and I came up with a pretty broad range of themes just because waste is such a broad issue. And so I set out my themes under these 4 wider categories so that I could answer my research question. And they were this current approach and processes being used in secondhand stores, the barriers that were directly preventing those stores from collecting data, sort of more indirect barriers that were holding up the process of reaching their overall goals, and then the successes. So these were things that were really helping the secondhand stores run, as well as opportunities for data collection, or where data collection was happening and how that was helping. So when I asked secondhand stores about their current approach, I found that they're all really driven by pretty cool goals. So these were either sustainability, like waste diversion, or they were community outreach or fundraising for other community outreach. I saw a lot of insight into the team dynamics. So they're really respectful, awesome teams that people are proud to be a part of. A lot use volunteers, and the teams are pretty creative at utilising their space and coming up with new systems. The scale of the system was shocking, like how long they've been running, and also just how many items they're turning over in secondhand stores in Dunedin is mind-blowing. And then also the scale spatially. So quite often they are part of wider networks, either across New Zealand, some are global, or even, for example, Rummage is part of the recycling facility. So that's a piece of a broader network rather than just a solitary independent op shop. And then I also looked a lot into the process, because that was a pretty key part of my research question. So that's like how they go about pricing their items and sorting them, whether they were collecting data, and other sustainable initiatives that they had going. The barriers that I came across, so direct, a pretty key one was a split focus. So because they are part of structured organisations and dealing with such a broad issue, since it's all waste, a lot of op shops were trying to cater to a lot of different goals. So like they were dealing with indirect pressures. So for example, storage doesn't necessarily directly impact whether or not you can collect data, but because they're trying to overcome that barrier for the overall running of the op shop, it's preventing them from having the time and resources to collect data. So that was a pretty key finding, is that their attention was being pulled in other directions. And then of course there were things like storage also directly impacts data collection, because there was no space for the equipment needed. The consistency in items was another big one. There's a huge range of items coming through these op shops, and so trying to find averages or a system that can be applied to all of them was quite difficult. And then some of the systems being used were quite difficult to use in general, just because they are dealing with so many wide things. They have to be pretty simple. And so like getting another complex layer in there by adding in a data collection step was quite difficult. The successes was a really cool point to look at, obviously. One of the things that I noticed worked really well was simple systems. So like having pretty large loose categories and trying to keep it down to as few steps as possible has really helped these op shops turn over a huge number of items. And they're really, really good at achieving their primary goals. Their primary goals just aren't necessarily data collection. So if they were mainly focused on waste diversion, they were really, really good at keeping items out of landfill. Or if they were trying to fundraise to support other community initiatives, they were quite good at creating that profit. And then for those trying to reach out to communities and provide affordable goods, they did that as well. Another cool success to see, which I found quite surprising, was specialisation. It was sort of that when there were volunteers or staff with expertise coming into stores, they were being really utilised. Like management have been really good at seeing the strength in their staff and then playing to it and allocating roles based on that. And so people become really good at their jobs, because it is long term. You get volunteers who have been going for years, and so they're really good at what they do. Same goes for the organisation overall. One of the organisations I talked to worked within quite a specific niche, and it helped them to keep their sort of processes and items quite consistent and their customers more consistent. So it would have been easier to introduce a data collection system. The team dynamics also was awesome to see. There was a super respectful dynamic where your opinions and ideas were really well respected, and so there was a lot more creativity coming through and a lot of upcycling initiatives coming through because of that, and really effective use of space. That's what I mean by layout, because of that respect, which was cool to see. Oh, I've just gone back too far. Okay, I've just skipped. How do I go back?
Can you just use the...
Oh, thank you. There we are, not very techy. So from my interviews and my research, I came up with 3 suggested systems to see what people at Rummage thought about. These systems were using a basket and because items go into the sorting room in most stores and then they get carried out into the shop in baskets. And so system 1 was putting those baskets on a scale as you move them from the sorting room into the store and taking that measurement. System 2, which was pretty specific to Rummage, was using the weighbridge. So having customers stop on the weighbridge as they enter and exit the store to find just the total weight. This would mean no categorization of those donations, but that was one suggestion. And then the third one was keeping a tally sheet and just marking the number of certain types of items that were sold so that you don't necessarily get weight measurements, but you could take averages and use those. None of them were perfect systems. As you can see on the next slide, they each had their flaws. One of them was that they all add a lot of time, because if you're going to collect data, you are going to have to add a new step into the process of sorting items. And another one that was difficult to overcome was the broad range of categories and how to get accurate measurements when you were dealing with such a broad range of items. And from my survey, that pretty much wrote off system 2 and 3 as viable options, just because of the indirect pressures that I talked about earlier. It would overrun, they're already dealing with a lot of waste, and to add that much time in wouldn't have worked. So system 1 is the viable option that I've found, if there are any. But before that can be introduced, there's going to need to be pressure alleviation, and it will also not be a perfect system for larger items, because obviously a table is not going to fit in the basket. So my main suggestions before the data collection systems can be introduced would be pressure alleviation of those indirect things that aren't necessarily stopping data collection directly, but they are making the process of sorting items more difficult. So this is, I've got along vertically the sort of an idea of the pressures that there are. So for example, low storage makes it difficult to process items, the large range of items. The reduction in the quality of the items that op shops are receiving was a huge issue that came up in all of my interviews. The time to process them, and also keeping the cost low so that the price can be kept low, because that was identified as a really important part of increasing turnover and keeping items out of landfill. And then some of the solutions that I came up with from research and interviews and just thinking really hard about it was introducing things like an upcycling network, so an opportunity for op shops to reach out with other community groups and offload some of the things that they're dealing with just to free up storage. And you can see where I have ticked. That's what I think it will help alleviate pressure. And so introducing the upcycling network would help with low storage. It would help reduce your item range. It would help with your item quality because people would be adding value to them. It could help with the public attitude towards waste because people would be seeing the behind the scenes of waste diversion, and it would help with costs because you are not really having to pay for anything. Same goes with things like introducing volunteers, introducing sorting bins that the public can use, public education. These were just a few recommendations. Again, each of them is not perfect, and because this is such an interconnected issue, it's probably going to need a series of small steps as solutions before we can get to the point where we can be collecting data. So yeah, to conclude, I really hope that my research and my report, when it is completed, will highlight the role of op shops as waste diverters. It's an incredibly important role, and the data that I set out to find would be very important for supporting those secondhand stores as waste diverters. But because they are dealing with such a broad issue, first there needs to be a few pressures alleviated so that they have that space to introduce data collection systems. And I think one of the ways to work towards that would be with more research. and finding things like the average weight of customer purchases, categories that align with weight averages for items, and the average weight of common household items. All of these things would make it a little bit easier to introduce systems once those other indirect pressures are alleviated. But yeah, it's a pretty exciting area. And I'd like to say thanks. Yeah, thanks to the Sustainability Office and Rummage and the DCC for letting me do this project. It's been pretty cool to do. Yeah, great opportunity. Thanks for listening.
Awesome, great. You can stay there if you want. We can
Sweet.
just have
Shall I
a little
move along?
discussion. Yeah, do you want to come sit in here? So thank you to all the speakers. Bit of a range there, but all obviously encompassing the broad topic of sustainability. Do we have any questions online? You can either unmute your speaker or feel free to pop something in the chat. Well, anyway, we can just have a chat amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
What cool projects. That's so exciting. So I guess for you, Grace, I was interested, like, did you get a sense from the people that you talked to, like, whether there was an interest in collecting that kind of data? Like, are they interested in having that data?
I think they understand the importance of having that data, but because they're facing so many other issues in the day-to-day running of the secondhand stores, it's just not a priority. That was a really interesting thing. Like, in my interviews, I'd say things like, oh, so what would you do if you like received more space? And they'd be like, it would be used for storage, not sorting. If you had more staff, they probably wouldn't go for data collection. They've just got too many other areas that they need to cover before they can be collecting it. So it's just not the top
a
of the mind.
priority.
But then some were also collecting data,
Mm-hmm.
and they were they were using that data in pretty cool ways for like showing how much they had been doing, and they appreciated that data, but that was because they had sort of covered all those other issues.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I went to America last year, and like I went to the Goodwill shop, and I don't know if you're familiar with how it operates there, but it's all based on like weight. So you obviously like go there, and then you just like weigh, and then you pay like a fee based on your weight, which I guess kind of almost eliminates some of those like barriers around kind of like costing and like all that kind of stuff, because it's just kind of like a set weight.
Yeah, getting the equipment in place, like once it would be set up. Would be pretty cool.
All right, so we have a question from Tessa for you, Grace. If they did adopt the basket weighing strategy, do you have ideas for weighing larger items and ensuring the process flows?
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking with system 3 was the tally system would be like, so at Rummage specifically, they have an outdoor area, and their larger items will be brought directly to the area and sometimes sold like on the spot there. So I was thinking maybe a notebook and just keeping record of how many of those items being sold just for now. But yeah, that was a really difficult part of the research question, was trying to figure out what to do with such a broad range in weight between items. So yeah, I think that will be quite a tricky one for the future, just until there's like equipment where you can easily do that kind of thing.
And where does a lot of their funding come from? Like if they were to get that data, like is there an appetite for like say government or corporate organizations to then be investing into these organizations? Or
I didn't find a huge amount of stuff on that. I know that there is the waste minimization fund through DCC, but yeah, that's
like
all
they're kind of
really
operating at a very much like a charitable.
Yeah, a lot of them are.
Yeah.
Some of them were operating as fundraising for other charities, so they do have, like when you have those processes in place, you can be turning over a profit enough that you're supporting,
like the hospice, for
others.
example, right?
Yeah, things like that. That works, but then, yeah, I guess they kind of work themselves because they are running with free donations and things.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, that wasn't something I looked into too closely.
Yeah, it's interesting there. So Sarah, I was interested, so you're talking about this product stewardship. I was like interested, I guess, in like the big, like obviously we know Apple is like a huge tech company. Like, do you know what they're doing in that space? Like, do they have any kind of sustainability initiative in terms of what happens with their products after they're generating them?
I haven't actually looked into it. But I did hear that at the university if they were to procure any products from Apple, 3% of the cost goes back to retrieving the product at its end of its life to be recycled. But there hasn't been any, I guess, clear documentation from Apple to show how this recycling is done. Yeah, so it is a good initiative, but it's not, there is a risk that big companies or big producers may kind of greenwash it, like kind of use it like, oh, we are sustainable, but it's not very clear what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So currently they're not really doing much.
Not that I've like looked into it.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess you kind of touched on it, like if you were to implement something like that, like you obviously need like a policy lever to kind of enforce that, or else like people can just be saying that they're doing something but not
actually follow through with it.
Yeah. Sarah, do you have any comments on student e-waste recycling specifically?
I think their options in Dunedin for recycling would probably be just to going to the Green Island recycling center, which is run by Cargill Enterprise. So ideally for student e-waste, instead of recycling, it would be better for them to reuse it or to refurbish it. So donate to local refurbishers like Com2Tech, or even I think Teoraka, they're hoping to collect electronic waste as well. I know even if you do have electronic products that are broken, like a broken mobile phone, companies like Remobile, they will still accept it to refurbish it and be reused in like their own in future mobile phones that they make. But it's an interesting one because students, they go through a lot of electronic products. Now everyone has an iPad, everyone has a computer. So I guess it's also a lot to do about education. Like if we're able, you understand how much goes behind making a laptop, you wouldn't feel the need to replace it just because an updated one has been released. Yeah. That's the answer.
Yeah, it's so crazy. It makes you think like everyone literally has a phone. Like we're surrounded by technology right now, but it's like no one's really thinking about where it's going after. Did you see like what was the coolest kind of upcycling initiative that you found or came across during your e-waste research?
I think the work by Lee Nichols with Regia Hardware Library. So he takes apart like even the acrylic sheets from computers. He used the acrylic sheets for like gardening. He uses it in his like laser cutting machines to create other crafts.
What do you mean by acrylic?
So just the panel on like your laptop screen.
Oh.
Just that sheet that covers like the laptop. He collects that and then he makes things out of it.
Oh wow. That's so awesome.
That was really interesting. Like a lot of innovation goes behind that. So,
yeah. Oh, it's such an exciting space. I feel like if you wanted to like have a startup or have like a business idea, it would be a good space to look at.
Definitely.
So there's a question for Charli. I think Charli may have left us. But the question is, did you get to see a breakdown of the demographics that were involved in the Waste Ed workshop? And I am not 100% sure, but I have a pretty good feeling that yes. But you'd have to contact her specifically to find out what those specific demographics were. So yeah, sorry, I can't answer that question. Did you guys have any final comments or questions or lasting thoughts you wanted to leave anyone with before we close up?
I had a question for Charli, but
I can try my best to answer it.
So in that table the survey, the one before the cost and after the cost.
Yes.
Before the cost, there was a lower percentage of people that produced more than 2 liters of waste, and then after the cost, there was an increase in that percentage. So I was just wondering, like, could it have been due to like maybe they're made more aware of what's considered food waste that doesn't have to be food waste, or like?
Yeah, exactly. I actually don't know the specifics to that question, but I can see where your thinking is coming from in terms of like, we've heard, obviously there's lots of this food scrap waste going into the bins. So if people are aware of that, then
obviously, you know, naturally their food waste is going to go up because they're actually like removing
More
that
than-
from, that's an interesting observation. Cool. Well, thank you both. It's a little bit of a random format, but you both did amazing, and well done to Charli and Max, who's not even with us, but great pre-recording. And thank you to everyone for your questions and for listening. And our next, so we're having a 15-minute break, or half an hour break actually, and then we're back at 3 p.m. And we have 2 more presentations in here, and we'll have another 3 that will be running simultaneously in the other room, and those Zoom links are on your program, so you can just click into whichever one you're interested in. Boom. Thank you.